That's why toilet doors in
Magic.
public areas open outwards now.
Okay.
So you can get a door open if someone collapses up against the door. So these, all of these things over the years, people say, risk assessments are crap and this, that and the other. It's all been geared towards, the majority response. So it's, it is interesting how these things, from back in the day, obviously, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
So,
And it changes every couple of years, of course.
Well, first aid and CPR primarily hasn't changed for 12 years. It's been the same for 12 years. And a lot of people have that misconception that, it changes every 5 minutes. And even the Australian Resus Council have come out and stated, listen, we don't want to change it anymore because people think that it just changes all the time. So why have they learnt it to start off with? But whatever changes are made are clinically proven and absolutely work for the better. An example of that would be if someone's losing a lot of blood, because blood's 37 degrees, they go into shock and they get what's called hypovolemic shock. They start to appear cold and go pale. So face is pale, raise a tail. You have a lot of blood left in your legs, lift the legs up, get the blood back to the vital organs, keep someone alive.
What if they're bleeding from the neck?
Well, then you'd look after the head. You'd primarily look after the head.
Right.
If it was a head injury, head would take precedence over that. And then airway would take precedence over
which way
everything.
would you raise them? You'd feet
You'd
up.
probably put them in a V. You'd probably go knees up a little
Okay.
bit and head up a little bit, in that scenario. If they were awake. If they were unconscious, then recovery position would... So putting someone on their side to facilitate airway would proceed or cover all of that. But in recent studies, it's shown that, a couple of people fell in frozen lakes and lived for... Well, they were dead for 30, 40, 50 minutes and then resusced with no CPR after 50 minutes and came back to life because the hypothermic state stopped the cell death as quickly in the heart. So they started doing what's called clinical trials on induced hypothermic states during death to chill people down to try and, resusc them. And that was brought through a little bit into military with, major bleeding. But in recent times, I've actually found that if you lose more than 2 degrees of your core temperature, then your blood only has a 20% chance of clotting. So they've actually found with a major bleed, if you can keep someone warmer, then they have a better chance of surviving. Which sort of makes sense in a way because they appear cold. But if they're cold, then their blood vessels restrict down, which in theory would reduce the amount of blood coming out of someone in the right circumstance. But all of these things evolve, a lot of it has come from military, but there is a lot of
and
also clinical trials that are around
that's
that.
a crazy thought.
Even Hitler in World War II, when he did all those trials and, eye surgery and cataract surgery came from World War II.
Really?
Yeah, they practiced a lot of that. And unfortunately, it was probably in the wrong situations with no anaesthetic, but they actually learnt a lot from those trials back in the day.
I had laser corrective eye surgery
Came
done.
from Hitler.
Far out.
They used razor blades back in the day to actually re-sculpt the cornea on your eye. That's what was done.
Mine was done with 2 Valium. The only time I've ever had Valium, and
how'd you go on Valium, mate?
Oh, I was wasted.
Eh?
I was wasted. I couldn't believe it. You know, 2, and I was just like, woo.
Yeah, 2 is a pretty big hit in one go.
Yeah. So they sliced like a C shape, just like, like a, exactly like that I can imagine, this old scar I've got.
Yep.
And they flipped the top of the lid off my eye.
Yep.
And then
took the cornea out.
Scraped it off, yeah.
Yeah.
Scraped off the stuff that was giving me lost vision, but I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
No feelings in your eye.
Well, that's similar in your heart too, There's not a lot of pain receptors in your heart. That's why commonly heart attacks aren't picked up as chest pain. They're normally jaw and neck pain, so referred pain. But yeah, it's, brain as well. Like brain surgery is generally, there's no pain receptors in the brain. Right, so they'll generally keep people semi-awake.
What's that movie? Silence of the Lambs 2.
Silence of the Lambs, there you go.
Clarice, like we just watched on The Office.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he just cut the top of her head off and was doing cooking her brain. Or his brain, or whoever that was.
Yeah.
This is the greatest podcast I've ever been in.
Yeah, mate, it's good.
An hour and 17. Put it there, Scott.
Yeah, mate.
It's not the end just yet.
Yeah, this is great. Loving it.
Mate, I don't want it to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you just, funnily enough, you just started talking about what I wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about I come across a mate, I don't know, he's fallen off a dirt bike, bleeding a lot.
Yep.
From something as simple that's very common, like a leg. Maybe he's not bleeding a lot, but what?
Let's go common motorcycle injuries. So someone comes off a motorbike. If it's a dirt bike, they hit a tree or come off. You're talking possible head neck injuries, which is always suspected with being open to hitting something at 80 or 90 k's an hour, or even less actually. I'm going to say fractures as well. So you might have a fracture of the leg where the bones actually come out. You could have quite significant bleeding or an impalement where something might have gone through someone. So in terms of looking after that patient, number one, if the bike's on them, get the bike off them straight away, because that's going to do no good for them. And, another thing that I suppose is a misconception with first aid, if someone's crushed between two objects, we now get them out of there. Whereas they used to teach years ago that you should leave them in because the toxins build up from this crush injury syndrome could be released and kill them. But in later years, they've learnt that getting them out, if it's reasonable to get them out, or you can lift the bike off them, then get them out. So make the area safe, and if you can't, then drag the person to safety. So if the bike catches on fire and they're close to the bike, you can't move the bike because it's on fire, drag the person clear of the bike, even with head and neck injuries. Going back to like that guy on the bottom of the pool.
Can I pause you just there?
Yep.
The old chestnut of don't touch their neck, don't move them. I guess what you're saying is it's actually rare that you'll actually crack someone's neck. So to pick them up by the shoulders and just pull them back into a more comfortable position, the chances of them actually cracking their neck is very low. Right?
Well, here's the way that they've worked this out, and conventional medicine now practices this. There used to be things called a cervical collar, which is a hard plastic collar that the ambulance used to use.
Those,
They no longer use it because they've found that it actually makes it worse, or it actually puts the head in an unnatural position.
Yeah.
Spinal boards, you cannot leave anyone on a spinal board anymore because it's an unnatural position. They're saying you've either got a broken neck or you haven't. If you're gentle with the person as a first aider, you're not going to contribute to that. That's reasonable. So they use a soft collar now, which is called a C-spine check in the ambulance.
That must be quite recent, eh?
It's only the last sort of probably 12 months or maybe a year and a half they've actually changed that guideline, but they've actually worked out that because the spine is so robust, if you've got a crack in it and there's a lot of structure and integrity around the spine, that if you grab the person and move them, well, ultimately, if you leave them next to the burning motorbike, they're probably going to burn to death anyway. So you really need to just... And I'm not advocating dragging someone around the car park for the sake of dragging them around. You only move them if you have to. But, if a basic technique is observed, or even if you're on your own and you can just grab someone and drag them. I've been dragged out from under cars by my feet and resussed in courses doing a role play, and it works perfectly okay. There's no problem with how that works. Get it done, improvise, adapt, overcome.
And there must be something... I've had one time when I was nearly dead, a really good accident. I wasn't knocked out either. But I know getting into comfort is a huge mental thing for someone to survive. And I'm sure that comes into play. If you are still conscious and you're messed up, if you still have to stay in this messed up position, because they put me in one of those spinal things and I got flown to Melbourne.
Uncomfortable as buggery, mate.
This neck thing was
horrible.
sticking in the back of my head. And I remember lifting my own head up just to go, but that was hours after the accident.
And they won't let you move. They never used to let you move, and it's,
But I remember, the only pain I had was this thing they put me in. And, I'm not saying anything bad about the guys at all. But it was the most unnatural, horrible thing. But the minute it came off, I felt like I was in control of my own recovery for a minute. And I'd imagine if we were in a dirt bike crash, squished up against some weird tree, just for your mate just to pull you by the arm somehow and get you in a natural position. It's a step towards recovery.
Oh, definitely. I think, getting them into a position of comfort, and I think prioritising where we need to look here too, because if you've got a patient that's been knocked out cold, then regardless of their injuries, if they vomit and they're on their back, they're going to have an occluded airway, and that is clinically dead. So regardless of the injuries, if you can get the person into a recovery position, which is just basically placing someone onto their side, putting their head back a little bit facing the ground, then if they do vomit, it goes on the ground. That's ideally the best thing to do. And doing that before calling an ambulance, making the scene safe, before calling an ambulance is really important. If you have 2 people, problem solved. You call an ambulance, I'll look after old mate. But bottom line, look after airway. The second, a lot of people also, and I teach a lot of ex-military people, and quite often they'll say, no, that's bullshit, Scotty. You've got to look after major bleeding first. And I'll quite often say to them, well, what's the most common cause of death in the military? Having your legs blown off by an IED. Okay, well, common cause of death in the military is bleeding to death, not airway occlusion. So you'd be taught to look after bleeding over airway, whereas we don't. Major bleeding, like even being ruptured through the heart or a main ascending aorta, or like a real big artery around the heart or the organs, you're still going to take a minute or 2 minutes to die. Whereas if I stuck your head underwater and got you to breathe water, you'd be dead within 30 seconds, 40 seconds, clinically dead. Or unconscious state, maybe a minute and then arrest. Whereas even the most significant bleeding will take a lot longer to kill you. So I'm going to look after breathing.
Okay.
So ABCs, airway, keep airway open, look after bleeding, and then I'm going to go airway open, look after breathing, and then I'm going to go for major bleeds. And here's another misconception, just while I'm thinking about it. I was dealing with this surfer, and it was a scenario that happened up at one of the hospitals I did a shift at, and he was paddling out on a wave, and a surfer, basically, he was paddling out, and another guy came across the wave and severed his Achilles tendon with his fins.
Wow, yep.
And just chopped his Achilles tendon open and severed part of it. And he came in, and the doctor that I was working with on that particular night said, did you realise that open cuts in the ocean are the worst thing for you? And everyone seems to think that getting a cut into the open ocean is good. And I was of that state of mind as well. I went, well, no, I thought the open ocean was great for your cuts.
Salt and all that.
Salt, really good. He goes, there is that many living organisms and bad bugs that live in the ocean. If they get into your body, it is really bad. Now, in a normal scenario, we'll sedate that person, maybe a little bit, give them some pain relief. Depends on how bad it is. We'll anaesthetise the area and fill it full of, anaesthetic, and then we'll flush it out with about a litre of saline. This doctor that I was with proceeded to put 4.5 litres of saline through this guy's Achilles because of how bad salt water was in this wound.
What is saline, by the way?
Saline is salt water.
Wow.
Salaine's salt water, but see the difference between saline and ocean water is saline is sterilised for 20 or 30 minutes. It's boiled and put through a process, so there's no living organisms in it. It's clarified. Right. Whereas open ocean water, it's like coral cuts. The infections that you can get from that is horrific. And even when he stitched the area up, I remember he did this lazy mattress stitch, which is an interesting style of stitch. It's like a double whammy on a stitch. And he stitched not, a couple of mils apart like a normal stitch would be done. He stitched like quite wide to allow for the pus to get out of the wound.
Just
because he was allowing for infection.
It's bound to happen. Okay.
And he put a drain in it. It was that sort of,
an experience. He's had that experience. No,
he knows.
We know what goes on around here.
So he said to me, if you ever cut yourself in the ocean, get out of the ocean, teach people this. Flush it with fresh water, then get the pressure on it. And I'm like, that's interesting, because normally we just go direct pressure, take it to hospital. It has a lot of time to manifest in there. So give it a good flush, even a bigger cut. Get pressure on it straight away, obviously. But ultimately, guys, we've had a lot of shark attacks lately in Ballina and great whites that seem to sort of have a bit of a bite and let go, and they'll hit an artery. Bugger that there. Just stop the bleeding and let someone else deal with the infection later. Ultimately, that's sort of one that's going to kill you in 3 or 4 minutes with an arterial bleed in the femur, that leg bone. So
it's as if bleeding, and you should treat bleeding and breathing as two separate things. We need to fix the breath, because that'll kill you and your brain.
Yep.
Yeah, and just sort that bit out. And then we get to the blood.
And then manage the other priorities.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
You need to be... Yeah. Every time you turn on Netflix, g'day, I'm Scott Whimpey. Let me just remind you.
Yeah, it's very expensive doing that sort of stuff, mate, because it costs too much
Tom
coin.
Tate can sort that out.
Oh, and just basic education in this area, isn't it? There's a lot of misconceptions. So going back to the dirt bike.
More to the... Yeah, sorry.